Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video, I am going to be wrapping up the 5 books that I read in the month of April 2020. So in the month of April, I participated in o.w.l.s Magical Readathon for the first time, reading 4 books, and I also read 1 book just for one of my English classes for school. I read a total of 1,746 pages in the month of April, and the ratings were kind of all over the place, and I think this is the lowest average rating I have ever had since joining BookTube. My average star rating for the month was 2.75 stars out of 5. That is less than a 3-star average. I did have 1 book that I absolutely loved. That was one of my favorite books so far this year, and there were some others that were not as good. So let's just dive right into it because we're starting off with the book that I hated the most this month. The first book that I read in April was for the Ancient Ruins prompt for the o.w.l.s, and that prompt was to read a book with a heart on the cover or in the title. So I got this book as an ebook from my library through the Libby app, and I gave it 1 star. That book was The Girls by Klein. I rarely give a book 1 star because, I feel kind of bad giving a book the lowest possible rating because, obviously the author worked hard on it, and just because I hated the book doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad book. But this book I hated, and I know there are people who love this book, and I kind of have a hard time understanding why, because I thought it was so bad. So The Girls follows our main character, Evie Boyd, and when Evie was 14, she saw these girls in a park and became fascinated by them. These girls, including one girl, Suzanne, with whom Evie is particularly fascinated, are members of this cult led by this leader whose name already escapes me. It's set primarily in the 1960s, and it's clearly based off of the Manson family murders. However, the author creates this cult based off the Manson family, clearly based off of them, not even trying to hide it. She brings nothing original to the table and somehow makes the cult less interesting than the Manson family. I mean, this book was just so utterly uninteresting in my opinion. Russell was the name of the cult leader, the Charles Manson of the story, if you will. And I think a major problem with this book is that it's based off these very infamous murders and this infamous cult, but it doesn't, in my opinion, bring anything new or interesting to the story. And the whole book is building up to this murder, which should be the climactic event of the story. The murder takes place off the page. Our main character is not there. And it was so disappointing. I was told that this book was a mystery thriller, and it's not. It's absolutely not. I do not know what I would classify it as. I guess as literary fiction, because another huge problem I had with this book was the writing style did not vibe with me at all. I felt like the author was trying to use as many words to describe things, as many words in her vocabulary as possible. And in my opinion, she was trying way too hard to sound smart. I feel like that's a really mean thing to say, but that is the impression that I got. I think she was trying to be very deep when she should have just told a good story. And she didn't do that, in my opinion. The thing is, the story was bad. It was boring. And people read books because they want a good story. So to me, that's really where it failed. But if you want my full thoughts on this book, you can watch the reading vlog where I read it for weeks 1 and 2 of the o.w.l.s. I will link both of my o.w.l.s reading vlogs down below if you want more detailed thoughts. But overall, yeah, I thought this book was shit. I'm sorry, it was so bad. And had I not been reading it for the owls, I wouldn't have finished it, but I needed it for my owls, and so I was propelled forward through the book by the burning intensity of my hatred. It's very rare that I hate a book as much as I hated this one. I thought it was just garbage. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you liked it. I'm sorry if somehow Emma Klein sees this. I'm trying to think of something nice to say about the book and I can't. I'm a bad person. Let's move on. Next, we went from my least favorite book of the month, probably the year, to my favorite book of the month, and one of my favorite books that I've read in a while, and that was Cersei by Madeline Miller, which I gave 5 stars. I really loved this one. Cersei is a feminist retelling of the story of our title character. Cersei was, in Greek mythology, a demigoddess of witchcraft, I guess you would say. She was the daughter of Helios, the sun god, and she had magical powers. And she appears in the Odyssey. She's very villainized in mythology, and this was a more sympathetic feminist portrait of her character. And I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. I enjoyed it so much. I am not someone who is an expert on Greek mythology by any means, but I think Greek mythology and other different mythologies are really interesting. So I do enjoy learning about those, though I would not say I'm an expert by any means. So I really found myself so engaged and immersed in this. It actually made me start researching mythology on my own time. I was watching YouTube videos about it. I was reading articles about different gods and goddesses and characters from Greek mythology. I thought this book was so fantastic, and I thought it was excellently plotted. It was excellently written. I said accidentally. Excellently plotted and written. Excellent. I can't speak. And it really just made me not be able to stop thinking about it while I was reading it. I was just so into it. Like I said, I am not a Greek mythology expert by any means. I know the most popular figures, the most popular stories, and one thing that I really enjoyed was to see other figures from other myths that I knew pop up in this story, and to see how these people who I'd heard about before appeared as characters in the story. I don't know if it's making any sense. And I guess if you were super familiar with Cersei's myths, then you probably wouldn't have been surprised by that. But me, as someone who only knows a bit about mythology, it would be really fun to see somebody who I'd heard of or vaguely heard of pop up in the story and be a character. So I thought this was a really fresh, interesting perspective, and it just really grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let me go until I finished. So I enjoyed this immensely, and I definitely want to read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I also own, and if she comes out with more books in the future, which I think and I hope she will, I will definitely pick them up because I loved this. Might be my favorite book of the year so far. I mean, I thought it was great. I really have very few complaints about it. I thought it was great. One book that I forgot to mention and want to talk about really quick is the one book that I read for class. This was the graphic novel, The Complete Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. And I didn't give this a rating because it wasn't something that I read in my free time. It was something that I read because it was on my syllabus and I had to. I did enjoy it though, and graphic novels are not a format that I usually gravitate towards. It's definitely not something I would pick up by choice in my own free time, but I did think this was well done, and you know, it was pretty enjoyable as far as required readings goes. This is based off the author's actual life. She is Iranian, and it talks about the war and conflict in her country and what it was like to, you know, struggle with her identity as an Iranian woman living in Europe for a time, and the different discrimination that she faced, and also how difficult it was to know that her home country wasn't safe anymore in her relationship with her family members and things like that. So I thought this was really good, and I learned some stuff that I didn't know before because I didn't know a lot about Iran. We never really were taught about that in school, so even though this was required reading, I still thought it was pretty good, but I didn't give it a rating. Next, for the owls, I read another book through the Libby app, and that was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was for the prompt where you had to read a book with a white cover, which I know that the cover is not entirely white, but you know, I had to find something. I didn't have books with white covers that I haven't read on my shelves, really. Also, Cersei I read for the prompt about reading a book with magic in it. I forgot to mention that. But Never Let Me Go, I ended up giving 3 stars. Never Let Me Go follows our main character, Kathy, and her friends, Ruth and Tommy, who are growing up at this boarding school in England, and growing up they live a very protected, sheltered life, but eventually as the years pass they have to learn about life beyond the school and confront the realities of their situations. And I think part of the problem with this book is that I knew information about it from other people's descriptions of it that I don't think I was supposed to know going in. And so I think that made it feel kind of anticlimactic, which is why I don't want to say too much about the plot of this book, because I don't want to potentially give anything away. I mean, you guys might know exactly what's going on with this boarding school already. People talk about it when they talk about this book, but I feel like maybe the book would have been better if I didn't know that and I could have figured it out for myself or been surprised, because it's not much of a reveal when you know it's coming. And I don't know, I feel like maybe even if I didn't know, I would have suspected that something was up just based on how information was revealed when. I don't know. I'm trying to not give anything away here, but it's kind of difficult. I really can't talk much about the plot. I did not by any means think this book was bad. I think it really just didn't do much for me. I didn't connect with it. I didn't connect with the characters. I thought the plot was a little slow, and also the writing style was very different than what I expected. I found the writing style to be excessively conversational. It was basically written as if Kathy is recounting these memories, and as one's mind does, sometimes she would go off to different places, or, you know, put a pin in something and say she was going to get to that later, or go off on something that wasn't really important. And that just, for me, wasn't something I really loved. I didn't think the book was bad, though. There was nothing offensive about it, nothing that really bothered me. I just don't think it was a book for me, and that's why I ended up giving it 3 stars. The final book that I'm going to talk about this month, I read for the o.w.l.s prompt, which was to read a book that involved shape-shifting. So for that prompt, I read The Sisters of the Winter Wood by Rena Rosner. Originally, I was not sure whether I wanted to give this book 2 or 3 stars, but I ultimately settled on 2 because whereas I gave Never Let Me Go a 3 because I just thought it was okay, not for me, this one, though it had potential, I was leaning more towards disliking it than ambivalence. The Sisters of the Winter Wood is a retelling of Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. It follows 2 teenage sisters, Libba and Leia. They are Jewish girls living in a village on the border of Moldova and the Ukraine in the early 20th century. When their parents have to go away, the 2 sisters are left to fend for themselves, and this group of strange men selling fruits begin popping up in their local market. And the younger sister, Leia, becomes interested in one of the men, but her older sister, Libba, thinks that there's something more sinister underfoot, and there are also some crimes that begin happening in their town. I was disappointed by this. It really, to me, succumbed to a lot of bad young adult tropes, like, for example, insta-love. Libba's love interest, who's featured more prominently in the book, I really wasn't invested in their relationship. The first time he's brought up, we establish that she has this massive crush on him. And then, I don't want to spoil anything, but there was also another romance that was really forced in almost at the very end of the book, and therefore that love interest really had no personality, and I did not care about them at all. It felt like the author just wanted everyone to have a love interest at the end of the book, so therefore she needed to force one in. And I couldn't root for any of the romances, nor did the characters resonate with me either. I did like how the author included a glossary of Hebrew and Yiddish words and phrases. I thought that was really cool, and I'm really glad that she included a glossary so that if somebody used a word I didn't know, I could go look it up and find out what it meant. However, I just feel like this book had so much potential that wasn't fully achieved. The format of the book had a potential to be really interesting because we have chapters from Libba's perspective, which are told in traditional prose, and then Leia's chapters are told via poetry. However, I didn't think any of the poems were particularly good. It was the type of poetry that just reads like somebody wrote something and hit enter a lot and thought that made it poetry. So it just didn't quite meet my expectations. I also felt like the plot here, while it wasn't bad, it definitely could have been enriched more, and the ending felt so rushed and convenient. It was really off-putting. I think that the author could have done things to differentiate her story more from the original Goblin Market poem and to make it more interesting, bring something new to the table. Also, this is taking place in the beginning of the 20th century, so there are some mentions about the persecution of Jewish people. However, it's not a major component of the book, and I feel like, you know, if she wanted to make that an element of the story and to make a statement about that, she should have incorporated it into the plot more. I mean, there were some threads of anti-Semitism, but I feel like the plot of this book just never achieved its full potential because there were interesting ideas here, but they just weren't executed like I personally think they should have been. And that's why I gave this 2 stars. So guys, these were the books that I read in the month of April 2020. Let me know, have you read any of the books that I read this month? And if you did, what did you think of them? Did you agree with me, disagree? Do you want to fight me because you loved The Girls and I hated it? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new bookish videos every single Wednesday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. You guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a magical rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you in the next video. Big cheers to putting makeup on for the first time in 5 weeks. Considering I'm out of practice, I don't think I did too badly.